marathon shuffle is something we see all too often with most runners. It's a point where it almost looks like we're walking in our race photos and we're not picking up our feet, we're scuffing our feet on swing through. And it's actually a fairly easy thing to fix, but it needs the proper coaching, the proper direction to do so. So we need to make sure that when we're doing this, we're not getting stuck into this point of double support where both feet are touching the ground. By definition, this is just a walk. When we have our front and our back leg touching the ground, that's a walk. And what it does is it minimizes our ability to travel any distance. As soon as we push off on this foot, we're already landing. We didn't get a chance to go anywhere, and our step length is very short. The point from push off to touchdown is so short that ideally what we're trying to do is get some ground to feed underneath us and not put this foot to the ground so quickly. So working on the marathon shuffle and fixing that is a great way to improve your speed with not having to sacrifice a lot. So today we're going to be talking about working on run form and what kind of issues we want to fix, and it's more than just midfoot striking, because here we have a runner who has a great midfoot strike, but there's things that we still have to improve. And one of the things that we talk about is not doing butt kicks, because butt kicks are pointless. They don't contribute to forward movement, and that's what we want to talk about initially. So when we look at this runner, we want to try to, at push-off, which he's doing on this before view, we want to try to maximize our push-off so that we travel as far down the road as possible. But the problem is, at push-off, we have a couple muscle groups firing. We have our calf firing, we have our quad firing, and our glute firing mainly. Now this calf and quad, if we look and she just kind of pushes from her calf, she's going to get a ton of upward movement. Sure, she's going to get some forward, but that slope of the line is indicating a lot more upward force. The same thing with the quad, a lot of upward force. We want to try to maximize our horizontal force. And there's ways that we can do that, and one of which is by incorporating a knee drive. So as we're working through this, one of the easiest things to do is to break out of our marathon shuffle. And the marathon shuffle is just the low swinging feet that most people have. They come towards contact, and if she was heel striking, which most runners do, she'd have a phase of double support, and she's obviously breaking that up by getting a good midfoot strike. But what we want to do is we want to break out of that shuffle where we have this really low swinging foot on swing through that scuffs the ground. And we need to get that foot up in the air, because what that's going to allow us to do is make this easier to swing through. All this rotation is happening in and around this hip. So if we can decrease the lever arm, which is the point from the hip down to the bottom of the foot and ankle, if we can make this lever arm shorter, the leg is now easier to swing through. And there's a lot of benefit to mastering this other than shortening this lever arm. But to get there, you can do one of two things. You can either fire the hamstring to get the foot to lift up in the air, which is kind of pointless because the hamstring works primarily when our foot's on the ground. So if we look at the foot coming through, just like a skateboarder, they're going to catch out in front. Let's say that she's on a skateboard back here. That's my skateboard. She's going to catch and pull from her hamstring and her glute to pull through on that skateboard. So as her foot's on the ground, she's getting a lot of activation through here. So the last thing we want to do is push off, and when that hamstring just went through a whole cycle of activity, to ask it to now fire and pull that foot up in the air. Like ideally what we'd like to do is have on-off cycles. So when your foot's on the ground, certain muscle groups fire. So phase one, the foot's on the ground, let's get these muscle groups to fire. And when the foot's off the ground, let's turn those same muscle groups off. So on-off cycles, we toggle back and forth. So what we can do, instead of doing a butt kick from here, which just lifts the heel, maybe makes it a little bit easier to swing that leg through, let's actually drive the knee forward. And that's what we're going to see in this runner. She's going to work on driving her knee forward, which causes a whipping action here. Now it's very important to note that we don't drive the knee up, because that's going to get us more calf activation. But as we run, if we can drive that knee forward, the foot whips up in the air, and we actually get better glute activation on that same side. So as she comes forward, this is her typical run form. She's running roughly the same pace in both of these videos, same exact runner. So we have her here, and we have her here. So there's not a huge difference in that angle, but what we do know is that if you just look at gross observation, she has this foot slanting down and this foot maybe just breaking even where it's picking up in the air. What that did is it shortened, like we said, it shortened the lever arm here, made it easier to swing through because now her foot doesn't have to hang down so low, and it makes it easier to pull through. But as she pushes off and she drives that knee forward, what happens is that whole foot lifts up in the air. She gets her nose out in front of her toes. But look at the gait cycle and how awesome this is. So as this knee drives forward, her other hip is coming into extension, and we have this reaction called crossed extension. So what happens is as we fire our hip flexors here, you'll actually get glute activation on the opposite side. Think about stepping on something sharp. What happens? This leg picks up, the other leg pushes down. That's a cross extension reaction. We can actually activate that by firing from our hip flexor here to drive the knee forward and get better glute activation. The great thing about the glute is if we look, as that glute pulls through on the thigh bone, it really just provides us horizontal movement, where the calf and the quad provide us horizontal but also vertical movement. So as we drive that knee forward, we get better activation on the backside, we get better movement forward and less movement up. The other thing too is that we look at the gait cycle again. When the foot's on the ground, you're firing posterior chain, which means that the opposite side, your hip flexors have to not necessarily completely shut off, but they're not a primary mover. So now we're looking at the toggling system again. When our foot's on the ground, we fire the posterior chain. When our foot's off the ground, we fire the anterior chain. So now we're toggling back and forth. We're not overutilizing one side of our muscle groups, and we're getting better, more efficient running. As she floats and as she gets a better push off, you can see how both of these feet are off the ground. Treadmill is just feeding underneath her when she's floating. Where on this other side, she pushes off here and she's already coming and landing on the other side. So she's not maximizing how much ground feeds underneath her with every step she takes. It's real simple. It takes a little bit of practice, but you work on driving that knee forward, and it gets you that great glute activation, the knee out in front of the nose here, and that gets her and gets you better activation of your glute, faster running with less vertical movement. Are you looking to become a stronger, faster, and more well-rounded runner? Then jump on over to RunSmartOnline.com and take our 10-day free challenge. Try our run-specific, time-saving, and easy-access videos that let you get stronger from anywhere, whether it be at work, home, or on the road.